DS of Exhibition. Tapos habang nagbabasa ako, kung may habol kayo, ano ba agad?
The meeting is hereby called to order. Please stand for the singing of the national anthem and remain standing for a minute of silent prayer.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupit, di ka pasisingil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong baghaw, may nilang ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidinig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walang pagsikta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga apit, at mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Committee Secretary, please acknowledge the resource persons and guests present today.
May we request our guest, if your name is acknowledged, to please recognize your name. From the Department of Budget and Management, Secretary Amina Pangandaman, Yusek Janet Abuel, Yusek Wilford Will Wong, Yusek Goddess Hope Libiran, Yusek Maria Francesca del Rosario, Yusek Margo Salcedo, Yusek Joselito Basilio, Yusek Leo Angelo Larcia, Assistant Secretary Achilles Gerald Bravo, Assistant Secretary Romeo Matthew Balangquit, Assistant Secretary Clarito Alejandro Magsino, Assistant Secretary Rolando Toledo, Assistant Secretary Gerardo Maula, and Assistant Secretary Mary Ann C. de la Vega. From the Department of Finance, Secretary Benjamin Jokno, Undersecretary Cielo Magno, Treasurer of the Philippines, Rosalia de Leon, Undersecretary Alu Dorotan Tioseco, Undersecretary Catherine Pong, Assistant Secretary Dakila Napao, Assistant Secretary Eufrosino Bernabe, Assistant Secretary Juby Danufrata, BIR Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr., BOC Commissioner Bienvenido Rubio. From the National Economic and Development Authority, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, Undersecretary Rosemary Edelion, Undersecretary Joseph Capuno, Undersecretary Melbourne Pana, Undersecretary Crystal Uy, Philippine Statistics Authority National Statistician Dennis Mapa, Undersecretary Sara Daway Ducanes, Undersecretary Reynaldo Cancio, Assistant Secretary Roderick Planta, Assistant Secretary Jonathan Uy, Assistant Secretary Greg Pineda, PPP Center Deputy Executive Director Jeffrey Manalo, Director Desiree Narvaez, and Mr. Lorenzo Atanasio. From the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Governor Eli Remolona Jr., Senior Assistant Governor and General Counsel Elmore Capule, Senior Assistant Governor Iluminada Sicat, Assistant Governor Lynn Javier, Managing Director Leila Magda Rivera, Director Dennis Bautista, Director City Hanisha Botocan, Chief Financial Services Officer Richard Hadulan, Chief Investment Analytics Charito Malto, and Bank Officer Marides Lee. May we also acknowledge the presence of the members of the House. Speaker Ferdinand Martin G. Romualdez, Deputy Speaker Isidro Ungab, Majority Leader Jose Manix Dalipe, Senior Deputy Majority Leader Ferdinand Alexander Marcos, Senior Deputy Speaker Dong Gonzales, Deputy Majority Leader Antonio Tonipet Albano, Deputy Majority Leader Wilter Palma, Deputy Majority Leader Marilyn Premisia Sagabas, Deputy Majority Leader Franz Pumaren, Deputy Majority Leader David J. Minority Leader Marcelino Libana, Senior Deputy Minority Leader Paul Ruiz Daza, Deputy Minority Leader Franz Castro, Deputy Majority Leader Erwin Tulfo, Deputy Majority Leader Christopher Go. Members of the Vice Chairs of the Committee on Appropriations, Senior Vice Chair Stella Luz Kimbo, Vice Chair Jose Alvarez, Vice Chair Jose Joboy Aquino II, Vice Chair Ching Bernos, Vice Chair Angelica Natasha Co, Deputy Majority Leader Janet Garin, Vice Chair, Vice Chair Joseph Jojo Lara, Vice Chair Jocelyn Lim Kay Chong, Vice Chair Francisco Jose Bingo Matugas II, Vice Chair Johnny Salimbangon, and from the members of the House and the Committee on Appropriations, Representative Maria Vanessa Aumentado, Representative Yasser Alonto Balindong, Representative Edgar Chato, Representative Solomon Chungalao, Representative Ernesto Junicio Jr., Representative Jaime Presnedi, Representative Mark Go, Representative Edsel Lagman, Representative Arnan Panaligan, Representative Agustina Dominic Diche Tina Pancho, Representative Salvador Pleito, Representative Maria Alana Samantha Santos, Representative Christian Onabia, Representative Rosana Ria Vergara, Representative J.C. Abalos, and Representative Arlene Rosas, Deputy Majority Leader Christine Singson Mehan, Representative Roman Romulo, Representative Mark Coanco, Representative Francisco Kiko Benitez, Representative Evgeny Vicente Emano, Representative Filemon Espares, Representative Isidro Lumayan, Representative Raul Daniel Manuel, Representative Rodante Marcoleta, Representative Journey Jet Nisay, Representative Janet T. Pimentel, Representative Joey Sarte Salceda, Representative Ron Salo, and Representative Eduardo Bro Eddie Villanueva. That's all, Madam Chair.
May we recognize Speaker Ferdinand Martin G. Romualdez for his opening remarks.
Thank you and good morning. Esteemed Deputy Speakers, Honorable Majority Leaders, respected Minority Leaders, distinguished colleagues, to our honored guest, Secretary Benjamin Diokno of the Department of Finance, Governor Eli Remoliona Jr. of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Secretary Amina F. Pangandaman of the Department of Budget and Management, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan of the National Economic and Development Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to this very significant event. I am deeply honored to be with you before you as we convene to address a pivotal cornerstone of our nation's progress, our national budget, considered as one of the most important pieces of legislation. Today marks the start of the deliberations on the proposed 2024 national budget, and we are honored to hear our guests explain the parameters used in coming up with the 5.768 trillion national budget. We will hear from these experts the macroeconomic and growth assumptions, government's fiscal and revenue collection performance, and expenditure priorities. The budget deliberations are a meticulous exercise that requires accuracy, objectivity, and most of all, transparency. As we hold the power of the purse, it is our duty to completely scrutinize the proposed 2024 national budget and deliver results that would sustain the gains of the past year and support the government's priorities and policy directions as identified under the 8-point socioeconomic program and the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. We need to closely examine the budget proposals of every department and agency and analyze every program and activity and project to ensure that the resources are allocated and optimized on the right priorities that address the economic and social changes of our beloved country. With utmost diligence, we will ensure that every centavo of the proposed budget of the 5.768 trillion budget will be judiciously spent. Obligasyon po natin na tiyakin na bawat sentimong buwis na ibinayad ng ating mga kababayan ay magagamit ng tama at nararapat. Bawat sentimo nila may serbisyong kapalit mula sa gobyerno. Having received the budget proposal 20 days earlier than the constitutional deadline, I am confident that the House of Representatives will be able to deliberate and pass the national budget on time and transmit the same to the Senate. I can assure everyone that the House of Representatives will not take a break until and unless we have passed this very important piece of legislation. Sisiguruhin natin na may pasa natin ang 2024 General Appropriations Bill sa loob ng 5 linggo. 4 na linggo sa komite at 1 linggo sa plenaryo. Thus, I call upon the members of this august body to actively participate in the budget deliberation, listen and respect everyone's view, particularly the concerns of our colleagues from the minority, and reach a consensus that is beneficial to the country, especially to the poor and marginalized among our people. With an unyielding commitment to unity and accountability, let me assure you that the House of the People will diligently, swiftly, and resolutely take action on the proposed budget as outlined in the National Expenditure Program. We are completely mindful of the weight of this obligation, and we recognize the trust and faith reposed in us by our citizens. Together, let us be a champion of fiscal prudence, effective resource allocation, and transparent governance. Through our collective efforts, we will continue to uplift the lives of the Filipino people and pave the way for the Philippines with a brighter future. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Salamat, Speaker Martin. Muli, magandang umaga sa atin lahat. On behalf of the Committee on Appropriations Chair, the Honorable Elizalde Co, it is an honor to welcome the members of the Development Budget and Coordination Committee to discuss the macroeconomic assumptions that will shape our legislative viewpoint on the proposed fiscal year 2024 national budget. As we embark on this journey, it is crucial to acknowledge the dynamic and ever-evolving nature of our economy, both on a domestic and global scale. The decisions we make, the policies we adopt, and the assumptions we hold will collectively influence the course of our nation's economic growth and development. In the coming fiscal year 2024, we are at a juncture where prudent macroeconomic assumptions are of paramount importance. We must consider the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the shifts in international trade dynamics, and the domestic challenges that continue to shape our economic landscape. As legislators, we must craft policies that foster economic resilience, inclusivity, and sustainability. In doing so, we must carefully scrutinize the assumptions that underpin our economic forecasts, ensuring they are grounded in reality and considerate of potential risks. One key macroeconomic assumption that demands our attention is the trajectory of GDP growth. We must assess the factors driving our economic expansion, from domestic consumption and investment to the performance of key sectors such as manufacturing, services, and agriculture. A realistic projection of GDP growth will guide our efforts in formulating policies that stimulate economic activity while maintaining fiscal discipline. We must strike a balance between short-term recovery and long-term growth, fostering an environment that encourages job creation and sustainable economic opportunities. The global landscape presents both opportunities and challenges that influence our economic assumptions. Trade dynamics, for instance, are transforming due to shifts in global supply chains and emerging technologies. As we set our revenue targets, we must consider the impact of these changes on our exports, imports, and overall balance of payments. Inflation and monetary policy are integral components of our macroeconomic assumptions. We must closely monitor the inflation rate and ensure that the central bank's monetary policies remain effective in maintaining price stability. In conclusion, our legislative perspective for the Philippines in 2024 is intricately linked to the macroeconomic assumptions we make. Our responsibility as lawmakers and policymakers is to foster an environment that supports economic growth, job creation, and sustainable development. By carefully evaluating GDP growth, trade dynamics, inflation, and monetary policy, we can craft a budget that not only responds to the current economic realities, but also position our nation and our people for a prosperous and resilient future. Our targets are not distant dreams, they are within our reach, waiting for us to seize them. Let us work together with unwavering determination and overcome any challenges that come our way. And at this point, Mr. Speaker, we accept your 5-week challenge. So thank you, and we shall now begin with the presentations of the DBCC, beginning with the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So may we recognize Governor.
Ma'am, we have a short intro.
Yes, the DBCC Chair, Secretary Amina Pangandaman,
Yes.
for her opening remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Speaker Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, Majority Floor Leader Manuel Jose Delipe, to the House leadership and other members of the House of Representatives, of course to our Vice Chair on Committee on Appropriations, Congressman Stella Kimbo. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of the Development Budget Coordination Committee, I wish to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the fiscal year 2024 National Expenditure Program. With the indulgence of the Chair and this committee, the DBCC members wish to make the presentations in this order. First, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Governor Eli Remolona Jr. will present the developments in the monetary, financial, and external sectors, as well as the outlook for the rest of the year and for the medium term. Second is National Economic and Development Authority Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, who will provide an overview of the Philippines' economic performance and the prospects for future growth and development for fiscal year 2023 to 2028. Next is the Department of Finance Secretary Benjamin Jokno, who will present updates of our fiscal and revenue collection performance, as well as on how the budget will be financed in 2023, 2024, and over the medium term. Finally, as the Secretary of Department of Budget and Management, I will present the macro overview of the fiscal year 2024 NEP and our priority expenditures. As an overview, the proposed national budget for next year amounts to 5.768 trillion pesos, higher by 9.5% than this year's national budget. It is the first budget to be fully prepared under the administration of President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. Anchored on a theme, Agenda for Prosperity, Securing a Future-Proof and Sustainable Economy, the fiscal year 2024 NEP is framed based on the 8-point socio-economic agenda in the near term and reflects the overarching goals and targets of the administration under the Philippine Development Plan 2023-2028. Thank you, Chairman, Speaker, and members of the House and the committee. At this point, I wish to request you to recognize BSP Governor Remo Lona Jr. to make his presentation.
Thank you, Secretary Mina. Governor Eli Remolona, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good morning. Magandang umaga po. To the Honorable House Speaker, Representative Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, to the Honorable Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee, Stella Kimbo, to the other honorable representatives present in today's briefing, it is my distinct privilege to present on the macroeconomic assumptions that lie behind the proposed national government budget for the fiscal year 2024, along with our assessment of the monetary and external sectors. As the newly appointed governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, it is my first time in this chamber, and it is my honor to be part of the briefing of the DBCC. If I may present my slides, I'm going to talk about the Philippine economy and how resilient it has been in the face of supply shocks. The first slide, after the title slide, shows inflation rates. The next slide you'll see will show inflation rates. The blue line is the inflation rate for headline inflation. Headline inflation is the part of inflation that's driven more by supply-side factors, and Bangko Sentral has less control over this part of inflation. The orange line is inflation based on the core CPI, which excludes the volatile components of prices, namely food and energy. This one is the one that's more easily subject to monetary policy. As you can see, headline inflation has fallen over the last 5 months. It's now in July, it was 4.7%. However, core inflation has remained high at 6.7%, although it has started to decline. And that decline is largely due to tighter monetary policy. The good news is that expectations are still well anchored. If you look at the picture on the right, the green line shows how expectations about this year, inflation this year, have evolved. So that's still kind of volatile. But the good news is if you look at the blue line and the red line, it's about expectations about future inflation rates. The blue one is 2024, and the red one is 2025. They're very well anchored. In other words, the markets and the people that are part of the survey believe that we will hit our targets in terms of monetary policy. If you look at the next slide, we show you how we think inflation will evolve over the next year or so. So here you can see the blue graph. If you just focus on the darkest part of the blue graph, you will see that it will, by the end of this year, it will have fallen towards our target range of 2 to 4%. In fact, it will overshoot a little bit in the early part of 2024, and then it will settle within the target range for the Banco Central, which is between 2 to 4%. Now, the lighter parts of the graph, light blue and above the darker parts, those signify the upside risks that we still see. These upside risks are things like additional transport fare hikes, higher wage adjustments, food supply constraints, and then El Nino, which tends to bring drought not just to us, but also to our neighbors. So that's an upside risk. There is a downside risk, which is that the global economy is expected to slow down, and this will affect us. So I will talk about that a little bit later. How did we bring this about? We tightened very forcefully, and that's shown by the graph on the left. The blue line is our policy rate, but we have a corridor system in which we have a ceiling and a floor for that policy rate, so that's shown by the light blue line and the green line. As you can see, we've been tightening forcefully since May of 2022, and now we have tightened by 425 basis points. In the last two meetings, we have paused, we have not moved, we have reconsidered, we have reassessed. The data is still mixed, so we're not sure. We haven't been sure whether to raise or even to cut. But for now, we are at a pause and we're reassessing the situation. So that's where we stand. The good news is, even with aggressive tightening, it hasn't really slowed down our growth. This is shown on the chart on the right. The growth was extremely strong, of course, in 2022, where it hit, the growth rate hit 7.6%. It has slowed down early this year, but we think by the end of the year, we will hit something like 6%. And this is part of the assumption for the proposed national budget. And we will do even better in 2025. So that's what we think will happen to our growth rates. Now, we recognize that when it comes to inflation, others have also played a part. There have been non-monetary measures that have helped bring down inflation. This include rice buffer stocks, provision of drought-tolerant seeds, and improved water and irrigation systems. This will be especially helpful if you get hit by El Nino. We have the enhanced Kadiwa program. We have importation of key commodities, for example. I won't go down the whole list, but these are examples of short-term non-monetary measures. We recognize we also have longer-term strategies. We will strengthen the local food systems. We have our HUG repopulation program, and we're about to implement improvement of digital and physical infrastructure. So those are the non-monetary measures that we think remain important. What about the exchange rate? We know that the exchange rate also affects inflation. The central bank has been using three tools. The first one is all the tools we also use against inflation, but there are side effects on the exchange rate. Monetary policy, of course, is adjusting the key policy interest rate, what we call the overnight reverse repo rate. As I said, we raised that by 425 basis points. Tightening means a somewhat stronger peso. We have also occasionally intervened in the foreign exchange market. This is to avoid destabilizing swings in the exchange rates, which tend to upset the markets and make them worry about the peso in the future, and this tends to weaken the peso. So we have judiciously intervened when things get too crazy in the foreign exchange market. We also have been offering forward guidance. So these are hints about what we might do in the next few meetings. This reduces the uncertainty in the market, reduces the risk premium that they assign to the peso, and so it helps to stabilize the peso. Of course, if the peso is moving in the direction that fundamentals say it should move, then we let it move in that direction. The result of this is stability in the foreign exchange market. The chart on the left shows the exchange rate between the peso and the dollar. Since 2023, you can see it's been relatively stable. It has remained below 55 pesos to $1. And that's how we hope it will continue in the next few months. The chart on the right shows you that the year-to-date depreciation of the peso has been under 1%. Somewhere in the middle is the peso. It's a red bar, somewhere in the middle. This is a smaller depreciation than the depreciation that was seen by the currencies of most of our neighbors. So I think we've succeeded in stabilizing the peso so that it doesn't get too harmful to our markets. One thing that does affect the peso is the inflows into our balance of payments. The biggest inflows have been remittances, as you know, as well as business process outsourcing revenues. That's shown in the upper left-hand chart. Dark blue is remittances, and light blue is BPO revenues. That has been rising, and we expect it to rise further next year. Below that is net foreign direct investments. That's a smaller flow than the other flows. The BPO and remittances are about 6 times foreign direct investment. And the foreign direct investment has weakened a little bit, and we expect it to stay around the same amount next year. The effect of this is on our foreign reserves. That's shown on the right-hand chart. Our foreign reserves have hovered around $100 billion, and we expect it to remain at roughly the same level in the coming year. I think that the foreign reserves that we have are ample and they're ample in the face of what we hope will not be so bad. We expect global spillovers. We expect, as I said, the world to slow down next year especially because of what the Fed has done. The Fed has tightened so aggressively. It's bound to slow down the U.S. economy, maybe even cause a mild recession in the United States, but it will also cause a slowdown around the world. And this poses risks to us because there are accidents, financial accidents that could happen, and it's good. It's a good thing that we have ample reserves to defend us against those negative global spillovers. In looking at our external accounts, the important thing, I think, beyond reserves is to look at our current account. So the current account is essentially the difference between our savings as a country and our investment as a country. In the graph, the orange line is savings, and the blue line is investments. Up to recently, we have been saving more than we've been investing. But as you know, there's a shortage of investments. So we have started to ramp up our investments. Our savings have not caught up with that, but now savings are not as high as investments, so there's a difference that accounts for our current account deficit. It was 4.4% of GDP in 2022. That's not a bad thing, I think, because with productive investments, what will happen is we will narrow the gap between savings and investment, and eventually savings will exceed investment, and we will have a current account surplus. So I think that's the direction that we anticipate for the current account. So for now, a deficit, but the deficit will narrow, and then we will eventually have a surplus, the way we're investing in our productive capacity. One thing that has helped is the resilience of our banking system. In this graph, the upper chart shows the capital of our banks. The green bars show the actual capital adequacy ratio. This is a measure of how strong our banks are. The light green bar is the regulatory standard for capital of banks, what we call the Basel capital adequacy floor. And over the years, since 2019 at least, our banks have maintained capital that far exceed regulatory standards. It's the same thing with liquidity. That's shown in the lower graph. Again, the dark part of the dark bars are actual liquidity. The light green bars are regulatory standards for liquidity. By the way, these are international regulatory standards, and you can see that our banks have remained liquid, and this way they have been supportive of our recovery from the pandemic. In the past, when we had a crisis, the banks had to repair their balance sheets. They were part of the problem rather than part of the solution. This time, they have been part of the solution rather than part of the problem. All these have led to our assumptions about the macroeconomics of the Philippines, and these are the assumptions behind the proposed national budget for fiscal year 2024. So here we assume that headline inflation will remain in our target range of between 2% to 4%. The price of Dubai crude will be within $70 to $80 per barrel. The exchange rate of the peso will be between 53 and 57 pesos to the dollar. The one-year T-bill rate, Leah's T-bill rate will be between 4% and 5.5%. SOFR, which is the secured overnight refinancing rate, that's a benchmark short rate globally, especially for dollars. We think that would be between 3.5% and 4.5%. We think exports will grow by 6%, and imports will grow by 8%. So those are the assumptions for the proposed national budget. Let me just mention some risks going forward. As I said, there is a risk of a global economic slowdown that will also drag us down a little bit. It's a good thing that we have ample reserves. El Nino will cause drought, maybe, in the Philippines, but it's already causing some drought in our neighbors. This means higher food prices. And then, of course, we have geopolitical and trade tensions. That's my presentation for this morning. Thank you very much.
Next to present is the National Economic Development Authority, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan. You are recognized.
Honorable Speaker Martin Romualdez, Honorable Appropriations Committee Vice Chair Stella Kimbo, other honorable members of the Committee on Appropriations, members of the House of Representatives, my fellow public servants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Please allow me to brief you on the country's recent socioeconomic performance and growth outlook. In this presentation, I will take stock of where the economy stands in terms of the targets we have set in the Philippine Development Plan, or PDP 2023 to 2028, our country's medium-term development blueprint. I will discuss prospects in the near and medium term, and I will conclude by discussing the strategies and priorities for next year. Let me begin with a review of the Marcos administration's 8-point socioeconomic agenda. The first 3 points of the agenda focus on the near-term challenges confronted by our country. 1, protecting the purchasing power of families by ensuring food security, reducing transport and logistic costs, and reducing energy costs to families. 2, mitigating the scarring from COVID-19 by improving health, addressing learning losses, and strengthening social protection. 3, ensuring sound macroeconomic fundamentals and enhancing the efficiency of government processes. Over the medium term, the agenda is all about creating more jobs, quality jobs, and green or resilient jobs. This is the way by which you can attain inclusive and resilient economic growth. This is what we call social and economic transformation. I will now discuss where we are and what we have achieved so far in advancing and addressing these priorities. The 8-point socioeconomic agenda serves as the framework of the PDP 2023 to 2028. This slide shown on the screen shows the overall framework of the PDP. The red panel focuses on enhancing individuals' and families' capabilities to enjoy a prosperous life through human capital development, improving social services, food security, and social protection. The green section is the framework on transforming the production sector through modernization, inter-industry linkages, R&D, technology, innovation, trade, and investment. All of these are directed towards generating more quality jobs and competitive products. Lastly, the blue-green area focuses on creating an enabling environment and a favorable business climate and establishing upgraded infrastructure. Political stability, good governance, and disaster resilience will be ensured while pursuing inclusive and resilient economic growth. The plan contains strategies that are consistent with our objective of social and economic transformation within the medium term. That is ultimately aligned with Ambition Natin 2040, our country's long-term vision of a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay for all Filipinos. Over the next 6 years, the development agenda of the Philippines is geared toward achieving the following headline targets. We will sustain high levels of economic growth in the medium term, with gross domestic product growth accelerating from 6.0 to 7.0% in 2023 to 6.5 to 8% from 2024 to 2028. Our latest available data shows that GDP grew by 0.3% in the first semester of 2023. We expect to achieve the upper middle income country status by 2025. Last year, our per capita GNI, or gross national income, increased to $3,950 US dollars from $3,550 in 2021. Meanwhile, the target unemployment rate is within 4 to 5%, and the percentage of wage and salary workers in private establishment to total employed, which is our measure of the quality of employment, shall be within 53 to 55% by 2028. The latest data show that the unemployment rate further improved to 4.5% in June 2023 from 6.0% in the same month last year. However, we need to catch up in terms of the percentage of wage and salary workers in the private establishments to total employment, as it declined from 48.5% in June 2022 to 47.6% in June 2023. Food and overall inflation will be kept within 2 to 4%. Food inflation slowed to 6.3% in July 2023, while headline inflation slowed to 4.7%. The national government deficit ratio, or deficit to GDP ratio, will be gradually brought down from 7.3% in 2022 to 3.0% in 2028. Outstanding national government debt stock to GDP ratio will also be gradually reduced from 60.9% in 2022 to between 48 to 53% by end of 2028. The deficit ratio was recorded at 4.8% in the first semester of 2023, while the debt ratio was recorded at 61% as of end June. The Philippines also aims to sustain its progress among the innovation achievers of the region by rising in the Global Innovation Index or GII rankings. Similarly, the country will be ranked among the top 33% in the Global Competitiveness Index by 2028. I note that the 2023 data for these two indicators are not yet available. Finally, all our efforts are intended to significantly improve the welfare of Filipinos. Our strategies are expected to result in the reduction of poverty from 18.1% in 2021 to a single-digit level by 2028. I now turn to an examination of our economic growth. The Philippine economy, as I mentioned earlier, grew by 0.3% in the first semester of 2023. On the expenditure side, household consumption grew by 6.0% in the first semester of 2023, a bit slower than the 9.3% in comparable semester in 2022, largely due to slower spending in food and non-alcoholic beverage, owing to high food inflation during the period. Investment growth slowed down to 5.4% in S1 2023, owing to a deceleration in fixed investments with muted growth in construction in Q2 or the second quarter of 2023. Meanwhile, government spending declined by 1.4% in S1, or first semester of 2023, which weighed down GDP growth in the first half of the year. Net exports dropped by 2.3% in the first semester as growth in total imports outpaced total exports. On the production side of the economy, the services sector remains to be the main driver of growth, posting a 7.2% growth in the first semester of 2023. The industry sector posted a slower growth in that period, largely owing to the weak performance of the manufacturing sector. Agricultural output in S1 2023 has increased slightly by 1.2%, benefiting from favorable weather conditions. Historically, I note that domestic demand is the main driver of growth on the expenditure side, with household consumption contributing more than 60% to growth prior to the pandemic. This is followed by investment with around 30% contribution. On the supply side of the economy, the services sector contributes around 2/3 of the economic growth in the country, followed by the industry sector. Meanwhile, agriculture has small contribution to our economic growth. As of the first semester of 2023, most sectors have already returned to their pre-pandemic levels or 2019 levels, except mining and quarrying, real estate, accommodation and food services, transport and storage, and other sectors, including arts and entertainment. real per capita breached its pre-pandemic level, or real GDP per capita breached its pre-pandemic level in the first semester of 2023, with growth at 5.3%. Examining the labor market situation, we find that it continues to improve as the economy recovers. Year-on-year net employment creation reached 2.3 million, raising total domestic employment to 48.8 million in June 2023. Relative to the same month last year, employment expanded in services and agriculture. However, these gains were moderated by employment losses in industry. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate further improved to 4.5% in June 2023 from 6.0% in the same month last year, resulting in 663,000 fewer unemployed individuals. The underemployment rate also fell to 12.0% from 12.6% in the same month last year. To recall, the underemployed are those who look for additional job or work hours, or a new job with longer working hours. However, quality of employment remains a key concern. The share of wage and salary workers in total employment at 61.9% as of the first semester of 2023 has yet to recover to pre-pandemic figure. This is mainly due to the decline in the proportion of workers in private establishments and expansion of those employment considered vulnerable, or the unpaid family work and self-employed work. Although the share of middle-skilled workers increased in recent years from 52.1% in 2019 to 56.7% as of the first half of 2023, the share of high-skilled workers has been in a downward trend. The country's overall inflation has been decelerating since February 2023, as already shown earlier by Governor Eli, with both food and non-food inflation moderating. The headline inflation decelerated to 4.7% in July 2023 from 5.4% in June 2023. Inflation of food and non-alcoholic beverages slowed down to 6.3% in July 2023 from 6.7% in the previous month, as inflation of major food items eased, with meat recording a deflation. Non-food inflation further eased to 3.3% in July 2023, from 4.1% in June, and amid the deceleration of energy prices. Non-food items remain the top contributors to July 2023 inflation, led by food services and housing rentals, along with passenger transport services. Food commodities, including vegetables, rice, fish, eggs, and other dairy products, bread and other cereals, and sugar, also drove inflation. Taking a closer look at investment, according to the DTI, the Philippines has so far secured $62 billion, or approximately 3.48 trillion pesos in investment pledges since President Marcos' first official foreign travel in 2022. The government also continues to attract local and foreign investors by positioning the country as an ideal destination to achieve their environmental, social, and governance goals. Meanwhile, total foreign investment approved in the first quarter of 2023 amounted to 172.7 billion pesos from 8.98 billion pesos in the same quarter of 2022. By sector, electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning supply had the highest pledges, received at 90.9% of the total foreign investment. Let me now proceed to the outlook. On June 9, 2023, the DBCC maintained the growth targets of 6 to 7% for 2023 and 6.5 to 8% for 2024 to 2028, taking into account already the risk posed by geopolitical and trade tensions, possible global economic slowdown, as well as weather disturbances in the country. Given the latest GDP outturn, the economy needs to grow by at least 6.6%, as I mentioned earlier, in the second half of 2023 to meet the government's low-end target of 6% for the year. However, risks to the growth outlook remain, as is already pointed out by our BSP governor. In terms of the domestic risk, elevated inflation remains a risk as domestic production may remain low due to high input prices, the spread of infectious and animal diseases, and inclement weather, including the onset of El Nino that is expected to last until the first quarter of 2024. Okay, let me proceed to the items that will support growth and risk and uncertainties that the government will pursue the strategies we have laid out in the Philippine Development Plan and as mentioned in the PDP 2023 to 2028. The priority strategies that the government will pursue in these coming years, as I said, are described there. This in turn also guides the allocation of government resources to various programs and projects that will contribute to the attainment of the government's socioeconomic agenda. And ensuring food security, the PDP's chapter on modernizing agriculture and agribusiness outlines the priority strategies to enhance the efficiency, productivity, and resiliency of agriculture and strengthen agricultural institutions. On addressing learning losses, the PDP's subchapter on improving education and lifelong learning focuses on providing quality basic education by enhancing early childhood care and development curriculum, developing and implementing catch-up programs to address learning losses, and improving teacher competencies. The PDP also highlights designing and implementing future-ready TVET programs and optimizing the roles of universities as innovation hubs and incubation centers. The subchapter on boosting health focuses on outcomes such as improving access, quality, and efficiency of healthcare and strengthening healthcare systems or health systems, among others. On strengthening social protection, the PDP outlines its strategies on strengthening social protection which aim to reduce and manage risk, particularly those related to individual and life cycle, economic, and natural and human-induced hazards. To reduce transport, logistics, and energy costs, the PDP chapter on infrastructure emphasizes the delivery of sustainable, integrated, and modernized infrastructure facilities and services. The chapter prioritizes strategies such as those related to moving people, goods, and information through modernized and expanded transport and digital infrastructure, as well as implementing reforms to bring down electricity costs, among others. Investment in energy innovation is also one of the strategies to respond to market demands for clean energy goods or clean technology goods and services. Meanwhile, the PDP subchapter 11.2 identifies ensuring sound fiscal management and improving the tax regime as an important part of macroeconomic stability. Revenue measures, including tax administration, such as automation of processes, are among the strategies to mobilize revenue. Public financial management reforms are also crucial in ensuring efficient government spending. Lastly, Chapter 14, the chapter on governance, pushes for accelerating digital transformation in the government as one of the strategies to strengthen government functions and systems. That concludes my presentation, Your Honors. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Secretary Balisacan. Next to present is the Department of Finance. Secretary Benjamin Diokno is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Ferdinand G. Romualdez, Vice Chair Stella Kimbo, members of the House Committee on Appropriations, fellow workers in government, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to brief the House of Representatives about the national government's fiscal position. But before proceeding, allow me to thank you for passing the House versions of our priority reform measures, such as the excise tax on single-use plastics, Package 4 or PIFITA, real property valuation reform, VAT on digital service providers, and ease of paying taxes. It is important that we ensure sound fiscal management to have adequate fiscal space for priority government programs, projects, and plans to achieve the 8-point socioeconomic agenda of this administration by 2028. To ensure a sound fiscal management, the Department of Finance, together with the economic team, has set the medium-term fiscal framework targets. In particular, we aim, number one, to bring down the debt to GDP ratio to less than 60% by 2025, wherein as of Q1 2023, the debt to GDP ratio is at 61%, down from 63.5% from Q1 2022. Number two, reduce the deficit to GDP ratio to 3% by 2028, wherein as of Q1 2023, the deficit to GDP ratio is at 4.8%. And number three, maintain investment in infrastructure at 5 to 6% of GDP annually, wherein in 2022, infrastructure spending is at 5%. Moreover, the economic managers have formulated a medium-term fiscal framework in order to support the administration's 8-point socio-economic agenda. The table shows the latest medium-term fiscal program as of June 9, 2023. The revenue, disbursements, and deficit targets are outlined from 2023 to 2028. In terms of revenue, tax revenue is projected to increase from 3.5 trillion pesos in 2023 to 6.5 trillion pesos in 2028, or from 14.4% of GDP to 16.9% of GDP. On the other hand, non-tax revenue is estimated to grow from 191 billion pesos in 2023 to 184 billion pesos in 2028. I'm happy to announce that we are on track to meet the MTFP targets. In fact, in 2022, the national government revenue collections increased by 18% year-on-year and exceeded the DBCC targets. Similarly, in the first semester of 2023, revenues grew by 7.7% and again exceeded the DBCC targets. The Department of Finance also implemented a fiscal consolidation program to further drive down the debt to GDP ratio. As seen in the table, the DOF plans to gradually reduce net financing from 1.42 trillion in 2022 to 1.22 trillion in 2024. This, along with the projected high GDP growth, is expected to bring the country's debt to GDP ratio to almost below 60% by 2025, as seen in the next slide. From January to June 2023, approximately 75% of our borrowing is sourced from domestic market. This is done to minimize our exposure to foreign exchange risk and other external risks and help in the development of our local bond market. Furthermore, as of June 2023, the national government has already secured approximately 65% of our borrowing program for the entire year. And this execution of our borrowing early in the year is advantageous for the country given that interest rates continue to climb throughout the first half of 2023. Our actual debt to GDP last year of 60.9% is significantly lower than the 62% MTFF commitment. And with our deficit program down to 6.1% this year and 5.1% next year, We are confident that we will be able to achieve the MTFF near-term target of reducing our debt to GDP ratio to below 60% by 2025, if not earlier. Now, the Department of Finance identified legislative priorities to stay on track in achieving our medium-term fiscal framework targets. We will continue to work with Congress in pushing for key reforms crucial to accelerating economic development. And this includes working for the passage of the remaining tax reform packages of the Duterte administration and pushing for the passage of additional measures such as excise tax on single-use plastics, rationalization of mining fiscal regime, motor vehicle road users tax, excise tax on sweetened beverages and junk food, tax on pre-mixed alcohol, VAT on digital service providers, carbon taxation, capital market development bill, and the military and uniform personnel reform bill. The measures outlined in this slide are crucial components of the medium-term fiscal framework. These tax revenue measures will enable us to raise revenues totaling 120.5 billion pesos, or 0.5% in 2024, and 183.2 billion pesos, or 0.6% of GDP in 2026. Aside from the proposed tax measures, the Department of Finance and its collecting bureaus are aggressively implementing reforms to strengthen tax administration in order to achieve the medium-term fiscal framework targets. The BIR and the Bureau of Customs are pursuing tax administration measures to improve collection efficiency. For the BIR, tax administration measures include the Run After Tax Evaders program, Oplan Candado, broadening of the tax base, nationwide raid of illicit cigarettes and vapor products, Run After Fake Transactions, and the Digital Transformation Roadmap. Meanwhile, for the Bureau of Customs, tax administration measures include Customs Modernization Program, Fuel Marking Program, Computer-Aided Risk Management System, and anti-smuggling initiatives. In closing, allow me to assure you, the honorable members of this chamber, that the Department of Finance and the economic team are working hard in support of the President's agenda of attaining a future-proof and sustainable economy through the 2024 proposed budget. We look forward to working closely with you in pushing appropriate and timely policies to make the country one of the fastest rising economies in the region. Thank you.
Salamat, Secretary Diokno. And finally, for the DBM, Secretary Mina Pangandaman is recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, good morning to the Speaker of the House, Sir Ferdinand Martin Romualdez, to the members of the committee and House leadership. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. On behalf of the Department of Budget and Management, allow me to present the proposed national budget for fiscal year 2024. Again, guided by our medium-term fiscal framework, the proposed national budget will continue to prioritize expenditures based on the administration's 8-point socioeconomic agenda and cater to the objectives of the Philippine Development Plan 2023-2028. In the interest of time, we'll proceed to slide 4 because Secretary Ben Jokno already highlighted the medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. But just to note, under the fiscal consolidation plan, the government disbursements will be sustained at above 20% of GDP on average. For slide 4, please. For 2024, the budget is set at 5.768 trillion pesos, and this is equivalent to 21% of GDP and is 9.5% higher than this year's 5.268 trillion budget. For fiscal year 2024, the DBM received budget proposals totaling to 5.9 trillion pesos. And in evaluating this, we have considered the following factors. Due to our limited fiscal space, we optimize the allocation of resources by ensuring that the programs, activities, and projects that will be budgeted are implementation ready and must be delivered and executed in the said year. Aside from a clear and comprehensive proposals, agencies must submit all relevant supporting documents. These include feasibility studies, detailed engineering designs, annual procurement plans, agency operational plans, agency sector roadmaps, and network plans, among others. Moreover, we refer to the budget utilization rates of agencies in the past years in evaluating their absorptive capacity. For example, we considered that a low budget utilization rate may reflect the agency's limited capacity to utilize additional funds. The proposed PAP should also be aligned with the priorities outlined in the Budget Priorities Framework consistent with the Philippine Development Plan 2023-2028, with infrastructure development and digital transformation being priorities of this administration. We also look into consideration the 3-year rolling infrastructure program and the Information System Strategic Plan in order to build the pipeline of strategies and projects needed to sustain inclusive economic growth. Now, on the budget itself, by general expense class, the maintenance and other operating expenses will cover the bulk of the proposed budget next year at 2.156 trillion pesos, or about 37.4% of the total budget. This is mainly composed of the operating requirements of the line departments, particularly the implementation of social programs. This also includes the allocations to local government units and budgetary support to government corporations. Next is the personal services expenditures, who will get the second biggest share, amounting to 1.695 trillion pesos, or 29.4% of the proposed 2024 budget. It is higher by 14.7% compared to this year's level, as it will fund the creation of additional positions in various government agencies, compensation of other PS benefits, as well as the pension of retired military and uniformed personnel. The capital outlays, on the other hand, will be provided with 1.246 trillion, representing 21.6% of the proposed 2024 budget. This will support the budgetary requirements of the new and ongoing infrastructure projects under the administration's Build Better More program for next year. Meanwhile, financial expenses constitute the smallest share of the budget of the proposed 2024 NEP, with an allocation of 670.533 billion pesos, or equivalent to 11.6% of the proposed budget. In terms of recipient units, the national government agencies will be allocated with 3.866 trillion pesos, representing 67% of the total 2024 proposed budget. This amount will cover the requirements of banner programs and priority projects implemented by line departments and agencies. It also includes special purpose funds like Pension Gratuity Fund, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, and the Contingent Fund, among others. The local government units will be provided with 1.008 trillion pesos, or equivalent to 17.5% of the proposed 2024 national budget. This allocation pertains mainly to statutory shares of LGUs from national taxes, such as the National Tax Allotment, the BARM Annual Block Grant, among others. And let me emphasize that the 1.008 trillion allocation to LGUs excludes the funds for programs under various NGAs which are intended for the implementation across regions nationwide. Meanwhile, the budgetary support to government-owned and controlled corporations composed of subsidy, equity, and net lending assistance to government corporations will amount to 222.5 billion pesos or 3.9% of the proposed budget. This includes substantial allocations for the implementation of the National Health Insurance Program under PhilHealth and the implementation of the Murang Kuryente Act, among others. Finally, some 670.471 billion will be allocated to the country's creditors as interest payments, which represents 11.6% of the proposed fiscal year 2024 budget. By sector, as with previous years, the biggest allocation will be provided to the social services sector, amounting to 2.183 trillion pesos or 37.9% of the proposed 2024 national budget. The economic sectors will likewise receive a large chunk of the proposed budget of 1.709 trillion or 29.6%. The prioritization of the social and economic services sectors demonstrates the current administration's resolve to reduce poverty, foster infrastructure and human capital development to steer back on a higher growth trajectory. Meanwhile, the general public services will be allotted with 893.3 billion pesos or 15.5%, the debt burden with 699.2 billion with 12.1%, and defense with 282.7 billion with 4.9%. Of the total 5.768 trillion proposed budget, some 3.630 trillion or 62.9% will be directly allocated to the regions. Of this amount, NCR will be allocated with 854.2 billion or 14.8%, Luzon with 1.342 trillion or 23.3%, Visayas with 604.5 billion or 10.5%, and Mindanao with 829.2 billion or 14.4%. The remaining 37.1% or 2.138 trillion pertains to the non-regionalized budget. This is composed of the nationwide and central office allocations amounting to 1.509 trillion and 629 billion respectively. For the departments with the highest allocations, education remains our top priority, covering 16% of the proposed national budget. This increased by 3.3% owing to higher provisions for the Basic Education Facilities Program, school-based feeding program, as well as instructional materials and other learning resources. And to sustain Build Better More program, the Department of Transportation will receive 214.3 billion to fulfill the administration's commitment to improving the Philippine public transportation system, including the rail transport. The total proposed budget for these top 10 departments is 3.249 trillion or equivalent to 56.3% of the total proposed 5.768 trillion pesos budget. Now, allow me to highlight the major PAPs in support of the administration's 8-point socioeconomic agenda in the near and medium term. The proposed fiscal year 2024 national budget is framed based on the administration's 8-point socioeconomic agenda as follows. First, strengthen the purchasing power of Filipinos. Second, reduce vulnerability and mitigate scarring from COVID-19 pandemic. And third, ensure sound macroeconomic fundamentals. For food security will remain a government priority. As such, increased funding will be provided for the Department of Agriculture's major programs. The budget for the National Rice Program, which was almost doubled in 2023, will further increase to 30.87 billion pesos next year. The program includes 9.55 billion pesos budget for the expansion of fertilizer support to make it more accessible to rice farmers. This will be complemented by the 10 billion Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, half of which will be dedicated to driving farm mechanization pursuant to the Rice Liberalization Act. Higher allocations will also be provided for other agricultural produce such as corn and high-value crops to ensure that all agricultural workers will have the support they need in terms of production. And to further enhance the productivity and income of agricultural sector, some 916.02 million will be provided for the National Soil Health Program to ensure the sustainable use and management of soil resources. Alongside the development of its land-based agri-industries, the government shall also spur the growth of aquaculture through the National Fisheries Program. This initiative shall include the empowerment of local fisheries in boosting their production and helping the country attain food fish sufficiency. And to reinforce productivity, the government will also invest in agricultural support services like irrigation with 31.18 billion and the construction, rehabilitation, and improvement of fish ports with 4.94 billion pesos. Moreover, some 4.5 billion worth of crop insurance will be allocated to protect small farmers and fisherfolk against losses from natural calamities, plant diseases, and pest infestations. Some 2.75 billion pesos will be dedicated to enhancing credit access and support to farmers and fisherfolks. In addition, some 9 billion pesos under NFA will be used for buffer stocking program. Interconnected with food security and enhanced productivity are efficient and accessible transportation systems. The government will reduce transportation and logistics costs by building more networks and transport systems. Hence, the budget for DOTR will double to 214.3 billion pesos from this year's 105.96 billion. The Rail Transport Program will receive the chunk of this budget at 163.75 billion pesos to implement ongoing rail projects such as the North-South Commuter Railway System and the Metro Manila Subway Project Phase 1. The DOTR's efforts will be complemented by the DPWH as it continues to construct, maintain, and rehabilitate roads and bridges to improve the mobility of goods and services across the country. As such, the DPWH will be provided with 822.20 billion pesos, of which some 322.15 billion pesos will be used to finance the provision of an efficient transport and logistics system for goods and services. We also hope to reduce the cost of transporting agricultural goods through the establishment of strategic growth networks and bridges from farms and mills. Hence, the DA will receive 17.27 billion pesos for its farm-to-market road program, some 3.97 billion pesos for the Philippine Rural Development Project, and some 500 million pesos for the Sugar Regulatory Administration for the construction of farm-to-mills roads and bridges under its Sugarcane Industry Development Program. Aside from food security and reduced transport and logistics costs, the proposed budget takes into account the importance of affordable energy in every household. As such, the government is committed to seeking a reliable and sustainable mix of energy resources through the DOE's Renewable Energy Development Program, Energy Efficiency Conservation Program, and Alternative Fuels and Technologies programs with a total allocation of 501 million pesos. This will be complemented by the NEDA's National Rural Electrification Program with 2.3 billion pesos. Meanwhile, to cushion the impact of rising fuel prices on vulnerable sectors, the budget for DA's Fuel Assistance Program for farmers and fisher folks will be maintained at 1 billion pesos. The same goes for the transport sector, which will be allocated with 2.5 billion pesos to cover fuel subsidies of affected public utility vehicle, taxi, tricycle, and full-time ride-hailing and delivery service drivers nationwide. Given the lessons from the pandemic, the fiscal 2024 proposed budget will continue to strengthen the primary healthcare facilities in the country. Thus, the DOH will be allocated with 22.9 billion for its HFEP program. This is also a step towards the attainment of the Philippine Health Agenda. To ensure the health of Filipino families, the Family Health Immunization, Nutrition, and Responsible Parenting Program will be provided with a higher allocation of 8.26 billion pesos for the implementation of major programs as the National Immunization Program, Family Planning Program, and Oral Health and Micronutrient Malnutrition Program. And to avoid another health crisis, the Prevention Control of Communicable Diseases Program will be provided with 4.76 billion pesos, which includes services and commodities to prevent infectious diseases. The DOH will also be allocated with 17.57 billion for its Metro Manila hospitals and 49.75 million for the operations of DOH regional hospitals and other health facilities. The National Health Workforce Support System will be provided with a higher allocation of 17.98 billion to deploy at least 26,035 healthcare workers to remote areas. This will further strengthen and enhance access to basic health services of the public, especially those in the marginalized areas. Meanwhile, some 19.96 billion pesos will be provided to cover the payment of arrears reckoning from July 1, 2021 to July 21, 2023 for the Health Emergency Allowance and COVID-19 Compensation Package for eligible healthcare and non-healthcare workers pursuant to RA number 11712. In addition, some 22.26 billion will be provided for the medical assistance of 1.31 million indigent and financially incapacitated patients. The National Health Insurance Program, on the other hand, will also be provided with 101.51 billion to provide accessible health services as mandated by the Universal Healthcare Law. As mandated by the Philippine Constitution, education remains our top priority. The PBBM administration is now also focused on recovering from learning losses caused by COVID-19 pandemic and investing even more heavily in human capital development. As such, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Program will receive a total allocation of 51.12 billion pesos, composed of 26.01 billion for CHED, 21.7 billion for 116 SUCs, and 3.41 billion for TESDA. Education assistance and subsidies will be allocated a total of 41 billion, with DepEd receiving 39.3 billion for education service contracting for junior high school, the senior high school voucher system, and the joint delivery voucher for senior high school technical vocational livelihood specialization. CHED will get 1.5 billion for its student financial assistance programs, while TESDA will receive 200 million for its private education student financial assistance program, or PESFA. The Basic Education Facilities Program will also be given a higher allocation of 33.8 billion for the construction of new classrooms and technical vocational laboratories, repair and rehabilitation of classrooms, procurement of school desks, furnitures and fixtures, electrification of classrooms, and construction of priority school health facilities, medium-rise school buildings, library hubs, inclusive learning resource centers, and community learning centers. Similarly, shall be provided with 3.42 billion for the various infrastructure programs of SUCs. Further to our education agenda, we will allot 12 billion for the textbooks and other instructional materials for the provision of learning packages, learning resources for library hubs, and printing of textbooks and teachers' manual corresponding to the new curriculum for kinder and grades 1, 4, and 7. Learning tools and equipment will be given a budget of 3.9 billion pesos for the provision of science and mathematics equipment and technical vocational and livelihood equipment. DepEd computerization program will also be allocated with 8.9 billion for the procurement of e-learning cart packages for learners, laptop for teachers and non-teaching personnel, and various ICT equipment for the Matatag Center to be established in 2024. School-based feeding program will be provided with 11.71 billion pesos for the provision of hot meals or nutritious food products for 220 days and milk for 55 days to severely wasted and wasted learners from kinder to grade 6. The Alternative Learning System program under DepEd will be supported with 632 million pesos for the programs on education, employment, and entrepreneurship for out-of-school youth above 15 years old who do not have access to formal education in schools. We are likewise strengthening social protection measures to ensure that no one will be left behind, especially the marginalized and vulnerable sectors. The DSWD's Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program, or 4Ps, will be provided with a higher allocation of 112.84 billion pesos for education and health grants, as well as rice subsidy to 4.4 million households subject to the program's conditionalities. The budget for social pension for indigent senior citizens will be doubled to 49.81 billion pesos to cover the increased government monthly allowance of 1,000 for more than 4 million indigent senior citizens who are not part of the pension system. Meanwhile, protective services for individuals and families in difficult circumstances will get 19.97 billion pesos, which will serve as financial assistance to almost 3.9 million individuals and families. In addition, some 5.62 billion will cover the implementation of Sustainable Livelihood Program to support 277,128 household beneficiaries, including 4-piece households that will graduate from the program in 2023. We will also allocate some 4.08 billion pesos for the supplementary feeding program that aims to provide meals to 2 million children enrolled in LGU-managed child development centers and supervised neighborhood play. Meanwhile, the DOH and DSWD will receive 2.76 billion pesos to implement the Philippine Multi-Sectoral Nutrition Project, which aims to deliver a package of nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive intervention and improve key behaviors and practices known to reduce stunting in 235 municipalities. The PBBM administration has also initiated its flagship housing program, the Pambansang Pabahay para sa Pilipino 4PH program, to provide decent and affordable housing for Filipino families. To realize this, the DSUD will be allocated with 9 billion pesos to cover 5% interest out of the 6% interest to be paid to GFIs and other private banks. The DSWD will be provided with 1.89 billion pesos for the Philippine Food Strategic Transfer and Alternative Measures Programs, or the Philippine Food Stamp Program, projected to benefit 50,000 households. Meanwhile, an amount of 364.43 million pesos will be provided for the water supply and sanitation program of LUWA, specifically for the provision of Level 3 potable water supply and adequate sanitation system, including the implementation of sanitation projects in the Manila Bay Continuum Mandamus covered areas. The Livelihood and Emergency Employment Program of DOLE will receive 16.4 billion pesos, from which tulong panghanap buhay sa ating disadvantaged workers or TUPAD program will receive 12.92 billion pesos. And under the Department of Migrant Workers, the OWA Emergency Repatriation Program will have a budget of 9.7 billion pesos to assist OFWs who are forcibly repatriated. To ensure sound fiscal management, the government will continue to invest in the necessary information systems to support the processes of the oversight and collection agencies, consistent with the Executive Order Number 29 on the adoption of the Integrated Financial Management Information System. As such, some 2.92 billion pesos will be allocated to improve the information systems of the BIR for the efficient collection of revenue. Similarly, the BTR's development of a treasury single account will be supported to allow for the consolidation and optimal utilization of government cash resources. Alongside this, the DBM will continue to implement its public financial management program, which includes the budget and treasury management system. With our trust to build resilience against disaster events, the government is developing a national indemnity insurance program for strategically important and critical government assets, so we can readily repair, rehabilitate damaged infrastructure. For 2024, we envision this program to cover DepEd schools in disaster-prone and vulnerable areas so that our students can continue to have access to education. The Philippine Identification System, or PhilSys, will continue to be supported with 1.61 billion pesos to accelerate the issuance of national IDs. Meanwhile, in line with our commitment to reducing bureaucratic red tape, some 145.53 million pesos will be allocated for the strengthened implementation of the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act. The Department of Foreign Affairs will be provided with a higher allocation of 8.08 billion to support its digitalization initiatives to ensure the unhampered provision of consular services, including the issuance of passports, visas, and other consular documents. This will include a higher allocation of 4.06 billion for e-passport and allotment of 54.67 million for e-apostille system. And to expedite tourism flow and enhance the security capability of the Bureau of Immigration through digitalization, the Bureau of Immigration will be supported with 1.98 billion for the expansion of its e-gates in international ports of entry and exit. On digitalization initiatives that will be supported by the government include the enhancement of the LRA's unified cloud-based information system and queuing management system and upgrading of NBI's clearance processing and issuance systems, among others. And to realize a truly inclusive and sustainable economy, the proposed 2024 national budget will also support programs that advance the administration's goal over the medium term and create more jobs, quality jobs, and green jobs, ensure a level playing field, and uphold public order and safety, peace, and security. To create more jobs and promote more investments over the medium term, infrastructure development will foster an environment conducive for businesses and investments through enhanced connectivity and reduced cost of logistics and transport. As such, Build Better More program will receive a total of 1.42 trillion pesos or 5.3% of GDP, well within the DBCC target of 5 to 6% of GDP. This is also higher by 87.3 billion or 6.6% compared to this year's 1.33 trillion pesos, which further testifies to the administration's commitment to further expanding and enhancing infrastructure development throughout the country. The bulk of the proposed infrastructure budget, or 43.5%, will go to transport-related infrastructure such as road networks and railway systems. In particular, the railway systems will significantly increase to 153.5 billion, higher by 113.4 billion pesos or 283% compared to its 2023 level of only 40 billion pesos. Strengthening disaster resilience also remains at the forefront of Build Better More program, with control systems cornering 18% of the proposed budget at 255 billion pesos. The Build Better More program will also help attain inclusive economic transformation over the medium term through investment in social infrastructure. These include provisions for school buildings, hospitals and health centers, water supply systems, power supply systems, housing community facilities, and reforestation projects. Aside from infrastructure development, the government will also attract more investments and create more jobs by promoting competitive and innovative industries, particularly among micro, small, and medium enterprises. As such, MSME development program of the DTI will be allocated with 783.05 million to fund initiatives to promote the growth of MSMEs. Of this amount, 100 million will go to digitalization programs of MSMEs. This will be complemented by locally funded projects such as the establishment of negosyo centers, the One Town, One Product, Next Generation Project, and Shared Services Facilities Project. For additional financing options, the micro-entrepreneurs, the fiscal year 2024 proposed national budget will provide a higher allocation of 1.5 billion pesos for the Pondo sa Pagbabago at Pag-asenso program, which will provide an accessible and sustainable alternative source of financing for at least 40,000 MSME borrowers. On the other hand, the Cooperative Development Authority will provide farm machineries and equipment assistance and grants, as well as start-up livelihood capital assistance to support micro and small cooperatives. The administration will also create more quality jobs by increasing the employability of the Filipino youth through skills training and internships in accredited institutions. With this, the government internship program will be funded with 808 million pesos. the Special Program for Employment of Students with 829 million, and Jumpstart Philippines program with 205 million. Also, the newest program of TESDA, supporting innovation in the Philippine Technical and Vocational Education Training System, will be allocated with 1.8 billion for the modernization of the Philippines Technical and Vocational Education and Training System. The following TESDA programs will also be funded in 2024. Special Training for Employment Program, or STEP, Training for Work Scholarship Program, TWSP, and Tulong Trabaho Scholarship Program. Aside from increasing employability of the Filipino youth, the government will also create more quality jobs by further advancing research and development and innovation in the country. As such, the DOST's Grants in Aid program, which includes the Science for Change and Set-up programs, will receive an allocation of 8.23 billion pesos. Further, the scholarship programs under the Philippine Science High School and Science Education Institute will be provided with 7.58 billion pesos to support 10,609 high school students and 50,616 undergraduate and graduate students. The NEDA will also get 100 million pesos for its Innovation Fund, which aims to support enterprises engaged in developing innovative solutions that would benefit the country's underprivileged sectors. And finally, some 1.33 billion pesos will be provided for the R&D initiatives of the SUCs. Technological advancements has given rise to a growing digital economy, which continues to create new forms of work, transforming the employment landscape. Hence, investing in digitalization of the bureaucracy is crucial not only in enhancing its efficiency, but also generating quality jobs for Filipinos. Thus, the proposed budget includes 38.75 billion pesos for the adoption of a whole-of-government approach to digitalization. This increased to 60.6% from its 24.93 billion budget in 2023. Up-to-date digital infrastructure is also vital for enhancing digital economy. Hence, 1 billion will be allocated for the ICT System and Infrastructure Development Management and Advisory Program of the DICT. In addition, funding will be provided for the National Government Data Center Infrastructure and the National Government Portal to connect government departments and improve its accessibility. Meanwhile, the National Broadband Plan, with 1.5 billion pesos, will help improve overall internet speed and affordability. Following the Philippine Development Plan, we will employ a whole-of-nation approach to scale up sustainable and green investments that propel economic transformation for a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. This entails creating sustainable communities and harnessing our natural assets to support green jobs and generate income for resource-dependent communities. Towards sustainable economy, we are likewise tracking our climate change expenditures to 543.45 billion pesos under the 2024 national budget, proposed national budget. This is higher by 17% compared to this year's allocation. The NCCAP strategic priorities are as follows: water sufficiency, sustainable energy, food security, knowledge and capacity development, climate-smart industries and services, ecosystem and environmental sustainability, human security, and cross-cutting action. Among programs tagged under the CSET are the DPWH Flood Management Program with 215.64 billion pesos. DENR's National Greening Program with 2.5 billion pesos, and the Protected Areas Development Management Program of DENR with 1.04 billion pesos. And in support of LGU's efforts in protecting their respective coastal areas, the national government will provide 216.64 million pesos for the management of coastal and marine resources areas. At the local level, 2 billion pesos is allocated for the Green program to support LGUs in promoting green open spaces and infrastructure projects for active mobility. Meanwhile, the Support and Assistance Fund to Participatory Budgeting will receive 1 billion pesos to accelerate access to safely managed and resilient water supply and sanitation services of lagging municipalities through local participatory budget processing in partnership with local civil societies. Lastly, to uphold order, public order and safety, peace and security, local government support funds shall cover the financial assistance to LGUs and the support to the Barangay Development Program under the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-LCAC. Lapit na. The fiscal 2024 NEP budget demonstrates how the resources of the national government are consolidated and optimized to remain on track with our agenda for prosperity. It is the administration's fervent hope that this budget will continue to lay the groundwork for future-proofing the economy and making the country's growth inclusive and sustainable, not just for Filipinos today, but also for future generation. At this point, I would like to invite everyone to watch a video we prepared on the fiscal year 2024 National Expenditure Program. For a copy of all these presentations and other materials, you may scan the kit and the QR code flash on the screen and included in your NEP kits. Again, thank you very much. Mabuhay ang Pilipino at ang bagong Pilipinas. Wabillahi taufiq walidaya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
The Philippines, now one of the best-performing economies in Asia. Defying global headwinds and the challenges of the pandemic, GDP growth hit 7.6% in 2022 and is expected to continue to be the highest in Southeast Asia in 2023. We are on track with our agenda for prosperity, our roadmap for economic transformation based on our medium-term fiscal framework and 8-point socioeconomic agenda. This is also aligned with the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. For fiscal year 2024, the proposed national budget is 5.768 trillion pesos, equivalent to 21.7% of GDP, 9.5% higher than the previous year's budget of 5.268 trillion pesos. This budget was carefully considered to strengthen the purchasing power of Filipinos, reduce vulnerability and mitigate scarring from the COVID-19 pandemic, and ensure sound macroeconomic fundamentals in the near term. Continuity of investments, implementation readiness of programs and projects, agency absorptive capacity, and alignment with expenditure directions were also taken into account. Bearing in mind inclusivity, the social services sector will receive the largest allocation of 37.9%, or 2.2 trillion pesos. Towards sustainability, the economic services sector will receive 1.7 trillion pesos, or 29.6% of the budget. The proposed national budget has been designed to achieve the near-term objectives identified in the 8-point socioeconomic agenda. To ensure food security, we will strengthen our agriculture sector. We are boosting rice production with 30.9 billion pesos for the National Rice Program. We will assist local rice producers through the Rice Competitiveness Enhancement Fund. Agricultural products such as corn and high-value crops will receive increased funding and we will improve agro-fisheries through the National Fisheries Program. To reinforce agricultural productivity, the National Irrigation Administration will receive 31.2 billion pesos to generate an additional 31,548 hectares of irrigated farmland. We will continue the Build Better More program with an allocation of 1.4 trillion pesos for 2024. This will fast-track the infrastructure flagship projects of the administration of President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. and see the construction and improvement of more roads, airports, railways, school buildings, hospitals, and health centers, as well as housing and community facilities. To achieve all this, we have allocated 822.2 billion pesos for the Department of Public Works and Highways and 214.3 billion pesos for the Department of Transportation. To reduce energy costs and promote a sustainable mix of energy resources, we are focusing on renewable energy development, energy efficiency and conservation, and alternative fuels and technologies programs. Following the lessons from the pandemic, we are expanding access to affordable and quality healthcare even in the farthest regions through the National Health Workforce Support System, Health Facilities Enhancement Program, and the National Health Insurance Program. Education remains a top priority, with 924.7 billion pesos, equivalent to 16% of the national budget, with higher allocations to the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Program, Basic Education Facilities Program, and the newest Supporting Innovation in the Philippine TechVoc Education Training System program. With strengthened social protection, we will ensure that no Filipino is left behind. We are providing the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program with a higher allocation of 112.8 billion pesos, while the social pension for indigent senior citizens is now doubled to 49.8 billion pesos. The Pambansang Pabahay para sa Pilipino program will be supported with a goal of building 6 million affordable and decent housing units within 6 years. We are also introducing the Philippine Food Stamp program to address the nutrition needs of the most food-poor Filipinos with 1.9 billion pesos.
Sa ating pagtahak sa kaunlaran, walang mamamayang Pilipino ang maiiwanan.
Towards bureaucratic efficiency, our digital transformation will be accelerated with 38.7 billion pesos for digital infrastructure. To ensure efficient and sound fiscal management, we will adopt the Integrated Financial Management Information System throughout the bureaucracy, following Executive Order No. 29, Series of 2023. To ensure sustainability, climate change expenditure tracking has now reached 543.4 billion pesos to monitor the scope and distribution of the country's climate action. Our local government units will receive 871.4 billion pesos pursuant to the Mandanas-Garcia Supreme Court ruling. Meanwhile, 70.5 billion pesos will be allocated for the annual block grant of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, which increased by 9%. We have also allocated 1 billion pesos for the Support and Assistance Fund for Participatory Budgeting to accelerate access to safely managed water supply and sanitation services in lagging municipalities nationwide. These will be identified through local participatory budgeting activities. Finally, in constant pursuit of fiscal transparency and accountability towards an open government, we continue to keep our budget and other releases open to public scrutiny.
Through the fiscal year 2024 National Expenditure Program, we are determined to remain on track with our agenda for prosperity, securing a future-proof and sustainable economy. It is our fervent hope that this budget will lay the groundwork for making the country's growth inclusive and sustainable and bring us closer to our goal of a new Philippines, not only for the Filipinos of today but also for future generations.
Salamat, DBCC, for your comprehensive presentations. At this point, to allow everyone to recharge, we shall take a 1-hour lunch break. We shall resume at 1:15. So this briefing is hereby suspended.